All right, welcome back to the show. This is still not the show, though.
Mm-hmm.
Joe.
Joe. Joe show. We're going to be talking about two kinds of Joes.
Yeah, all right. Oh, a lot, because, because remember the other day we were talking about Joe Ibn.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Field of Internet Conversations. Episode something or other. CES letter. The Book of Mormon. Questions and concerns. Subtitle. Questions and concerns.
Concerns and questions.
I guess I'm dyslexic.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh, man. I already talked about that. I did a whole episode on that.
I know. I'm bringing it back.
Check the links down below for the references we make if you're way behind on your Pastafarian ramshackle lore. Book of Mormon's concerns and questions. The Book of Mormon. He starts with quotes, and that's good to contextualizing it.
Yeah, so we love to, in all of our Sunday talks that we give, when we're asked to give talks at church, we all quote our prophets again and again throughout this talk.
Yes.
And that's what we're taught to do.
That's an important idea. There are twice a year in the Mormon Church, there's a thing called General Conference, in which all the general authorities are there. They gather in, of course, Salt Lake City, right across from the big temple that you know, that Mormon temple with the 6 spires. Right across from that, they built, it used to be in the tabernacle with the tabernacle choir that you have heard of. And then they outgrew that space because it was built a century ago. Mm-hmm. So they moved across the street into a much bigger building that is something to behold. And yes, and it happens twice a year. It's called General Conference. It's filmed and broadcast. Everyone watches it as live as possible.
Yes.
And then each of those speeches, in which is about it happens over a weekend. Mm-hmm. There's women's conference before it. There's 5 sessions of it, each 2 hours long, with about 6 speakers in each one. Mm-hmm. Each one talks for about 20 minutes. It's like this TED Talks sort of idea.
Get together, yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same guys. The prophet speaks a couple times. The first presidency speaks a couple times. Each apostle speaks at least once. Yeah. A lot of the 70 speak, are invited, and they're very excited. We test out new speakers to see how good they are at this, because this is one of the major jobs of the 15. The top 15 is give a couple talks, a 20-minute talk every 6 months about a subject, a religious subject.
Motivational talks that don't bring up questions.
Well, each one of them addresses sort of an idea. Yeah. They're all on a topic, and I don't know who assigns them, but somebody does. Mm-hmm. And there's always one on like faith. There's always one on Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so then they sprinkle it around. It's like a big show. It's like it's a ritual. It's very everyone dresses up. Yeah. You feel the feeling that you want, that you're coming here for, quite severely. There's a lot of times you're fasting during this. Yes. A lot of times there's lead up. Women, like I say, have the conference the week before, so they have like more lead up. Mm-hmm. There's a men's only session that is interesting. You go with your sons. You bring your young sons. It's you and your kids, and so there's lots of these traditions embedded in this idea. General conference is very important. Then all these talks are written down in one of their publications, the Ensign, and there are 12 issues a year, and so 2 of them are just literally the transcripts of these talks. 2 of those episodes, or 2 of those
Serial?
No, I said it already. Issues. 2 issues a year are literally just the transcripts of these talks. And then those transcripts are used and quoted by the members of the church, because every week they are asked to give a talk. 2 people are asked of 2 normal people like you or me, 2 or 3, 2 and a child sometimes, are asked to give. The child gives 5 minutes, and then the adults give like 20-minute speeches. The bishop says something or other, introduces it, and those are the weekly meetings. And so those talks are always based on some of the talks that are in the previous thing. And so we go listen to the talks, and then we tell the talks to each other for 6 months. And that's that's General Conference. And so most of the quotes are coming from, or not most of the quotes, but a lot of the quotes. I don't know why we were contextualizing that, but that is sort
we
of...
like to quote.
That's Mormon culture. That's why
Mormon
there's...
culture.
That's
why you always see us quoting each other. It's
right.
like evangelist Christian quoting his Bible for every other phrase. Instead of the Bible or the Book of Mormon, we're quoting our...
Right, there's a very broad... Yeah, there's a very... And the pattern of who's quoting whom. And because it really does happen that, like, the prophet will say something, and then the next 6 months later, an apostle will be quoting that one. Like, they're just quoting 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And all of these things are considered scripture, to be honest.
Yeah.
That these people under the influence of the Holy Ghost... talking to the church, all of these things, called by God, all of these things are effectively scripture, like the Old Testament, just bunch of weird garbage that's like, whoa, and it's like, yeah, and then that continues, the Mormons are continuing that tradition, which I find to be inspiring, right? I find it to be a good idea. Here is the conversation continues. That's interesting. But that's not how they frame it at all. It's
only the few select can write scripture instead of everyone.
Right. It's not like the TEDx idea of like, if you want to, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Book of Mormon. I don't know what that a thing was. It was just sort of an aside. So now that the aside episode's over, welcome to the new episode. Communications Internetal. What is it? Communications oblique. Internet conversations. Chapter 1. Book of Mormon, concerns and questions. The Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. Just as the arch crumbles if the keystone is removed, so does all the church stand or fall with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. Another reiteration of J. Rubens Clark idea that if we say such true, if it's removed, the whole thing falls apart. It's very important that how many voices have said this inside of Mormonism. It has been the dare that they've been daring us the whole time is either this is good or this is evil, and that's why we cannot leave it alone. Because either it is good or it is evil, and I have determined it is not good. Right? We have the math has come back, determined that it is not good.
Harmful.
The equation, it's either good or evil, is your equation, and this is where it brings us. And that was said by Ezra Taft Benson, who was the prophet, the number one guy, and so you get called as an apostle from the quorum or the quorums of the 70, or there's been others. And then you're an apostle, and then you're an apostle for life. Quorum of the 70, they can go up and come down, go up and come down, but you go up to apostle, you're there, right?
You just sit there till you die.
You sit there till you die, and then it's superiority that moves you up. It's not like the cardinals voting for the pope. It's who's been apostle longest.
Yep.
It's literally just that.
Yep.
And so it's very interestingly, Brigham Young secretly ordained his sons as apostles because he was hoping, whatever he was hoping, the way we do it now, they would have been apostles, none of them, or would have been prophets, none of them were. It didn't work for any of them. He did it when they were like 12 and 16, which is insane. Like, just, no Mormon knows that shit.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, that doesn't count. And it was like, right, it definitely doesn't count right now. It doesn't work. You cannot ordain a 12-year-old as an apostle. It's an insane idea. And the fact that he did it is just another thing up there. It's just like, why was it different right then? So Ezra when he became the prophet, he was very incredibly old. I believe he became prophet in the 60s or 70s and died in the 80s, I believe, if I'm thinking of the right guy. I believe this is the guy that
I just have to look at him.
That looks like Yoda. Yeah, I can tell them by their faces. Their names all blur to me because growing up in this idea, the previous prophets, you knew yours. I knew Gordon B. Hinckley. He was my guy. And then the one before that was like that face when I was very young, and then there's that sort of black and white face. That's how it works because it's sort of programmed into you mythologically. They really do become these feelings instead of these people. So, but I believe Ezra Benson is the And I have
what did you do just there? It hurt.
Yeah, and I have a nephew named Ezra, and it's not. It might not be a direct reference from this, but it definitely is part of it. And I. Do I have? Is there a nephew named Benson? I gotta go over my nephews. Is someone's middle name Benson?
Maybe.
Maybe someone's middle name is Benson. I'll have to look that up.
But we have a lot of prophet influenced names. So.
In my I have a lot of nephews that are prophet influenced.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's not a singular thing. Yeah, I believe is there a Gordon? I think someone's middle name is. Did I already do that one? I don't know. They don't hang out with me much. So he was old when he became prophet, and then just got older and older. And so it's generally the oldest fucking dudes saying the most important shit.
Yeah.
And it's just
cultures way back.
Right? And so it's very crusty. It's hard to shed the crust that these old motherfuckers are putting on this. Everything in the church, everything rises or falls on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and by implication the prophet Joseph Smith's account of how it came forth. It sounds like a sudden death proposition to me. Either the Book of Mormon is what the prophet Joseph Smith said it is, or this church and its founder are false, fraudulent, a deception from the first instance onward. And this man here, Jeffrey Holland, is current. Yes, that's yeah. He's very jowly. He was one of my favorites when I was on the mission. He had just been called, and so was very, very. They have a fervor, and an eagerness, and they're being sold to us, right? Here's your new one, isn't he great?
Get excited about him.
Yeah.
Love him.
Yeah, so when I was before I was called, he's one of our brand new magical guys. He's so great. When I was peak Mormonism, he was he and another guy were the new ones, and I think I'm getting them confused. Jeffrey L. Holland and the other guy is. Oh damn! I might be getting him confused. Maybe Holland is a very tall guy with the glasses.
Getting your kayfabe mixed up.
Yeah. My characters, my mythology. But he is currently alive, and he is in the top half of the 12 right now. There's sort of a junior senior division, and he's in the seniors. And that was the New Era is another of the publications they have. This is the teenage publication. This is the publication aimed at teenagers. There's also one aimed at very young kids with like coloring exercises in it like that. So they have 3 monthly publications. The New Era at teenagers, the Friend at children,
and they sell it to their saints,
and the Ensign for adults. Yeah, they all come plastic wrapped together in your mail every month.
You have to buy it. It's not part of being a member.
I am not sure about that, whether your tithing pays for it or whether you have to buy it separately. I'm not positive about that. But the chances are, you have to buy it. You definitely have to buy your temple clothes. You have to buy.
Both of our moms have mentioned they bought us a subscription at one point.
Yes, I have had subscriptions coming to my house without signing up for it personally, that I've had to cancel.
Yes.
Because it's rough, man. It's some rough stuff. Happily though, I had a subscription for the issue where they very first published the Seer Stone, which we'll get to, and so I have one of those down in my thing, and so it's very nice. It's all online, so it's very easy to find and reference. But to have one in print, no, because that's the thing, is everything printed in this Ensign must stay in print. That's one of the issues that they have. That's one of the issues we're going to bump into a lot, is when they call this stuff scripture. That's when right that, and then these paradoxes and contradictions accumulate, and then when you start to examine the pile of them, you recognize that it's an ever growing group of contradictions, unfortunately. And it ought to be, because some of the things that they've said, like we will say, is how evil it is to be gay, and how despicable it is to be an inferior race. So a lot of the things that they've said ought be contradicted, but they're loath to contradict them because of this rule that anything said over these pulpits during these general things are practically scripture. So this is a difficult idea. So these publications, this is why we're referencing these publications. It's monthly. It's been going for a century. Some of these. The Ensign is basically started in Nauvoo, I think, as a publication called The Times and Seasons. I believe that they can be seen as very similar ideas. And I believe that Deseret News started as one of these. The newspaper, the independent, I believe, newspaper in Salt Lake City started as this sort of really slanted Mormon thing, and is still very obviously Mormon slanted. And so there's the Tribune that, there's this other one up there. All right. So introduction number 1. What are 1769 King James Version edition errors doing in the Book of Mormon? Purported ancient text. Errors which are unique to the 1769 edition that Joseph Smith owned. I think it's very self-explanatory. There are various swaths in the Book of Mormon that quote the biblical stories practically word for word. And then when there's errors, they turn out to be unique to this thing, the one that he had, which doesn't make sense. Why is it like that? Why isn't it?
And what are these errors?
We can go over them if we want. All right, he's saying that the reference he's making is 3rd Nephi 12-14. That apparently there's something going on in there in a version that Joseph Smith had that is current, that shows up in the Book of Mormon, but is unique to that version of it. There's an error there.
Okay.
So I don't know what the error is. I'm not seeing it here, but I mean we can look that up. We don't want to get these things are very minor.
Yeah.
Like.
But just to, like a comma or like a word misspelled.
Right.
Or like a reference.
Yeah, something minor like that.
Okay.
Yeah, shows up in these verses and nowhere else. They show up in 2 places, in the Book of Mormon and in this one version of the Bible that Joseph Smith happened to have.
1769 edition. Okay.
When King James translators were translating the KJV Bible between 1604 and 1611, and this is a very important Bible. This is the first Bible, like the English one. It started in a lot of places, and then it sort of codified around 300-400, and into this Latin thing, and then it stayed in that until 1611. It spread as Latin to all these other languages, and then in 1611, the English people, the King James of England, was like, yes, let's have an English version of this so that these people who don't speak Latin know what's going on. So this is the first English Bible. Okay. I believe the KJV is well, maybe it's not the first, but it's very definitely huge, right? Like people had this. This is the version they had. It's like if Shakespeare had a Bible, what was it? It was this. And Shakespeare had the Bible, right? Shakespeare's after the Bible. 1611. Shakespeare's what? 1666, some shit like that. Mm-hmm. That's right. He was around then. I don't know. I think he's late 1600. And so this is in context. The first English Bible, the non-Latin, showed up in a generation or 2 before Shakespeare did. So that's why the language is Shakespearean. The KJV is the version of the Bible that we do use as Mormons. It's one of the very most. And so that's the thing. We want to keep the steps simple, but it gives us very primitive things because we use very old shit. Joseph Smith did for a while. It doesn't matter. Yeah. They would occasionally put in their own words into the text to make English more readable. We know exactly what these words are because they're italicized in the KJV. What are these 17th century italicized words doing in the Book of Mormon, word for word? What does this say about the Book of Mormon being an ancient record? So he's saying, why are they there? It doesn't make sense. This is a fingerprint of translation, and here it is over in this other one that should should be a unique translation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the argument there. And then here is his example in Isaiah 9:1. The shall, right? Nevertheless, the dismissed shall not be such as was in the vexation when the, and so the, and down here by the way of the Red Sea, they just say sea beyond Jordan, and so when they translated it, they were translating it to an English audience, so they added these words from the Latin so that it flowed like English.
Right,
but if you just literally translated it, these words aren't there. And so when they were doing it, they're like, well, we're adding to the Bible. What do we do? And they're like, well, tip them like this, and then they'll know which ones we've added.
Okay.
So that's why it's like that, is because in a normal translation of a book, you don't care. But this whole thing about, like, you're fucking holding the Bible right now. Fucking be careful. Yeah, make sure you write down which words you're adding. Yeah. And so that's where, and they're in there. You can see them all there, and they're generally clarification words. Like he went under the storm on the third watch of the night. Like of the night will be there, and went into like okay, I get it. And then you take them out and you read it, and it's like, oh yeah, it's really clunky. It sounds very very weird. And it's like, yeah, because that's how that language is passed. That's how Latin sounds. Is like brown dog eateth, right? It sounds like that, and so that's why they do that. But then here they are again, which should be independently derivated. It should have come to us not through that translation process, but through a different translation process. So here's evidence that it didn't. The above example, 2 Nephi, dated. So 2 Nephi is the second book of the Book of Mormon. It's quoted a lot. It's an important book. They have left Jerusalem and they arrive in the New World, and that's where 2 Nephi starts. Lehi's sort of idea is over. The journey's over. Here we are, Promised Land. Get to work. Free reign. Fucking Jesus tells Jacob his name. Like, just crazy stuff. Like, it gets crazy in 2 Nephi. It's weird in 1 Nephi, but we're still in the old world. And then 2 Nephi, we're like, gone. So, so it's good stuff. And there's lots of sermons in it, I think. 1 Nephi is sort of, there's not too many sections of just like people talking and talking and talking. It's more like this happened, then this happened, and this happened. But then 2 Nephi chills out and people just start sermonizing, and it's fucking nuts. Quotes nearly verbatim from the 1611 translation of Isaiah 9, including the translator's italicized words. Additionally, the Book of Mormon describes the sea as the Red Sea. The problem with that is Christ quoted Isaiah in Matthew and did not mention the Red Sea. The Red Sea is not found in any source manuscripts, and the Red Sea is 250 miles away. So when Joseph Smith put this in the thing, he also added some things, including this red word here, which he was incorrect about. Now, Joseph Smith grew up in an area where there's nothing going on. He was very, very low income. His parents were farmers, and I don't think great at it. And he had a lot of siblings, and he had medical issues when he was young. His parents were very poor, and they had this sort of magical way of bringing themselves good fortune. You know, like they were very mystically minded, and biblically as well. Like he had this version of the Bible, and it's, you know, like television and radio, like.
It's what you're allowed to read.
Yeah, and so he was very steeped in this thing. And there was also a book in the at school that talked about a war, but did it in sort of this biblical language. It was this. It was a book called The Late War, and it talked about the War of 1812. But it talked about it like, and thus George Washington went unto the, you know, like that. And General so-and-so took unto him 200 men of strong and true blood and things like this. And so he had the Bible that was doing this, and he had this sort of pseudo idea. And then he did it as well. He dictated this sort of pseudo biblical story and to a transcriber, and then they eventually published it. And that's where, you know, and so when he was adding to it, you know, Red Sea, and he was very versed in the idea, and he thought he understood it. He had seen the Bible so much, and that he thought he understood what was going on, but he didn't. He had a very primitive understanding of it, and so he's wrong in a lot of cases. And here's one of them. His understanding of primitive America, it was practically non-existent. He talks about horses and things in this Book of Mormon we'll get to, and so he thought he knew what he was talking about, and he just walked like L. Ron Hubbard, right? He didn't think his facts could be checked, right? He was just like, that star is this, and that star is that, and that star is that, and it's like, Ron, we're going to be there someday, and we're going to prove you wrong. And he's like, we're never going to be there, right? He just didn't think his facts could be checked, and he knew they couldn't be checked in his lifetime, right? And Joseph Smith was very similar. Is like, you can't check these facts. Like, what are you going to do? Go over there? Come on. It can't be done in 1813. So he says, where in fact does the red come from? He starts very esoteric. It's weird that it's very literal.
The part you read out loud, have it scrolled low down. Yeah,
I'm right here. Malachi 3:10 says, and pour out a blessing, and there shall not be room enough to receive it. And then Nephi 24:11 or 10 rather. Has the same italics. 3rd Nephi comes in the second half of the Book of Mormon. 3rd Nephi is the one where Jesus returns.
I think
so it is time frame wise at the execution, the life of Christ. It starts, and then he's born, and then there's some, and then he dies, and then he shows up. And I think all of that happens in 3rd Nephi.
Okay.
And then there's a 4th Nephi where that the guy who was alive during that time, his kid is the prophet. So third Nephi is, there's been a resurrection of sort of this first original society, right? The society has gone through a lot of changes, and then they've become again to the greatness that they were at the beginning. It's been 600 years. And so another person calls himself Nephi in like our ancient father, and then it's during that time that Jesus comes back, and so he calls his kid Nephi. So there's 3 Nephis in the book, and one of them wrote 2 books. The first one wrote 2 books, I think is how it goes. Or maybe, I think so. I think the 3rd Nephi and 4th Nephi are different people. I'm almost positive. In the above example, the KJV translators added 7 italicized words to the English translation, which are not found in the source Hebrew manuscripts. Did they go from Hebrew? So I guess they did. So during the 1611, they weren't taking it from Latin. That Latin Bible is called the Septuagint. The one that they used between the... When was it written? I think it was written right around the 3rd, 4th sort of thing. No. Okay, I'm getting things... No. The Septuagint is the Hebrew Bible written into Greek. And what is the Latin... It's the Vulgate. The Latin Bible that was used by the Roman Church until it was the Vulgate. Okay. And then the Septuagint is the Greek version of the Old Testament writings that Paul had. That book that he had, his Bible, was called the Septuagint. And he was writing, and then that was put together and translated into Latin, and that's called the Vulgate, and that was used until by the English people and most of Europe, and then the English version came from the Hebrew. So they went back to the Hebrew Old Testaments, but the New Testaments must have been that from the Latin. No, from the Greek. The Hebrew and the Greek.
Do we need to do some homework?
No. I'm just The way that I'm finishing the sentences is correct.
Okay.
The Greek, because what's his nuts? Paul wrote in Greek, and then the church in Rome wanted their book in Latin, so that's the Vulgate.
Okay.
So the Greek writings, and we've got a lot of those, and they were just sort of spread around like comic books. They weren't joined together.
Newsletters.
Right. So here's the really good one, and it's like it's the gospel according to Paul or according to Luke, and it's like, oh, I love this one, right? But it wasn't like here's the 4 gospels. It wasn't like that.
Right.
I mean, some of them were, but
some of the comics were grouped together.
right. But then it was tightened and Latinized into the Vulgate around the 400s.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I don't know what we call it before that. I don't know what we call it between the time of writing of Paul's writings and when it turned Latin. I don't know what we call all those manuscripts, but it's not really the Bible at that point. It's those epistles, and it's like they're slightly separate.
Yep.
Right.
Still growing.
Right. And so the 1611 got those Greek things and then Hebrew Old Testament stuff from as old as they could get. So they didn't use the Septuagint. Maybe they used the Septuagint in 1611. I'm not sure about this. I don't know what they used because the Septuagint was in Greek. So they didn't use it. He's saying they went to Hebrew. I think they may have used the Greek Septuagint. No. Because when you look at the translation, like Strong's and things like that, for the New Testament it's Greek, and I think for the Old Testament it's Hebrew. So yeah, I think that they did get their translation from the Hebrew. I don't know what writings that would have been. Maybe the same writings that the Septuagint was used.
Right.
It was taken from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fucking books, dude. So stupid. Translations of translations. But at least, yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Why does the Book of Mormon, which is supposed to have been completed by Moroni over 1,400 years prior, contain the exact identical 7 italicized words? So, that's a good question. Book of Mormon includes mistranslated passages. The Book of Mormon includes mistranslated passages that were later changed in Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible. These Book of Mormon verses should match the inspired JST translation instead of the incorrect KJV version that Joseph later fixed. And then it gives an example. Okay, so here's the context for that. At some point, Joseph Smith was like, no, that's what it says in the Bible, but it's wrong. And everyone's like, oh yeah? And he's like, yeah, the Bible isn't translated correctly. It says this, but what it meant originally was this. And they were like, oh yeah? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, you can see that? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, for the whole book? And he's like, yeah. So he started to do it one day. And it was sort of his life. The life of Joseph Smith is very interesting. When things happened, when things started to be part of the law is very interesting. Because, he wrote the book in 1829 and 30, I think. He was writing it in 1829. When did he get the plates? Right? He got the plates in 28. I don't know. I have to we'll talk about this. I'll do a little homework and to get it tight.
Yeah.
But he gets the plates, he writes it, he starts the church, they go here, they get kicked out. They have a little period of chill right here, and then he just starts to talk more about it and inflate it, and then they do it. So there's a couple inflation periods. There's the initial one, there's Kirtland, and then there's Nauvoo. And in the first couple ones, there's no polygamy, for example, and that really shows up in the last one. And in the first one, there's no mention of the first vision. That shows up in the second one, I think it shows up in Kirtland. We'll look into that. Yeah. But at one of these times, he started to be like, okay, it's time to write it. It's time to translate the whole Bible. And he does for a while, and you can get the Joseph Smith translation, and it's not the version of the Bible that the Mormons use. They use the KJV version with the footnotes of the major differences down in their footnotes. So, like, when Joseph Smith said, this is different, it's not in the print in their book, it's down here in the footnotes. Mm-hmm. And so it's very interesting because it's not the first presented version, it's the second presented version. It's buried one deep. And so that's the point, is the realist version is the most buried version. That's what we keep finding is the version of reality that I'm being presented is as far away from the real version of reality as they can get it. Yeah. That every time I go a step deeper, I find a different story that's more true, and it's really upsetting. So he finished it. At one point he said, in like a journal or something, he said, I have completed my translation. The translation of the Bible is complete. And so, and it's not. Like, there's some things that we found later were mistranslation that he doesn't mention. And there's a couple ideas that he doesn't mention at all that we found out later. For example, the end of Mark is an addition. It wasn't originally there. He doesn't address that idea in his translation. The pericope adultery, this really big idea. This, when Jesus said, now go and sin no more, he says, where have your accusers gone? None of that ever happened. It was added later. No one says anything about it. He doesn't mention it going by. It should have been like a huge thing if you were like, wait, take that out. If that's really what he was doing, how come he was so bad at it from what we've been doing it later? And so that's what he's saying here. And here's a typical example of the difference between the Book of Mormon and the KJV. And so here are some examples. In 3rd Nephi, which is and Jesus comes back in 3rd Nephi 11, so Jesus is here. And so in 3rd Nephi, Jesus dies over there, over in the old world, and leaves them and comes over here to the new world where the Nephites are. And then since he's here, he just gives his sermons because he has them written down, right? They weren't extemporaneous. It wasn't him just talking to the people. It was like, it's time for the sermon that I've prepared that I'm going to give twice. I'm going to give to you and to the next guy. So it was very much like this general conference. It was like, here's my talk. It's titled Sermon on the Mount. And it's like, that's not how it happened. What happened was there were some people and he just started talking, and that's what it was. And it was like, no, it was a sermon. And it's like, so he came over here and he gave the same sermons. He gives the Sermon on the Mount with some subtle differences and a couple other ideas. And here are the examples, and we can read them. This is sort of the driest shit. And so, but yeah, you can read them at your own. But that's his argument for that is right. And why are they here? And so that's three. That's three subtle different arguments. And there's 100. And so we're going to be going through all 100, touching each one and talking about, because each one of these is enough.
Yeah.
Each one of these is enough to be like, well, I think he might have lied.
Yeah.
And because the answer to the question, because the idea is, there was a moment in my life where I really did pray and say, was Joseph Smith a liar? And it was after I had looked at all his lies, and I couldn't deny it, and I had that feeling. That feeling that you get. The same feeling of, is this the person I'm going to marry? Is this what I should be doing? Should I go on a mission? Is this the right church? Those feelings, the feelings that you're basing your testimony on, showed up in the wrong place. Did Joseph Smith lie to me as hard as he could? How do you deal with that? And it's only really after you look at all these ideas and just enumerate them and you start counting on your fingers, and it's like, oh shit, that was 100. What is a reasonable idea?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll continue this soon. Thank you for hanging out with us. Again, thank you to our patrons. Scrupulous Atheist and Brian McCoy, who are helping us out with this idea. This is our very low budget sort of show here, just sitting here talking about the internet, talking about internet conversations. It took an hour for me to do that, so I'm using it over and over. So fuck you guys. But yeah, see you next Friday. Thank you for coming to Friday School, and see you never.
Bye.
Yeah.